Welcome to DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. Geez, this one for a while now, I have a feeling. Talking all about Strahd's 4 consorts, Anastrasya, Ludmilla, Volenta and Escher. I did touch upon it in my very old now favourite Curse of Strahd homebrew changes video, but only very briefly. One of the reasons I put it off is because there's already so many guides and Reddit posts and videos about them. They've been heavily covered. It's a popular thing for people to homebrew them, change them, give them bigger roles, give them unique abilities. 2 such videos are by Lunch Break Heroes and Locke, also known as the Wereraven. I'll share the links to their 2 videos in the description. But I still wanted to do it as my take might be a little bit different. I've been, and this kind of acts as a bit of a disclaimer, I've been on the Curse of Strahd subreddit for years. It's possible I might have grabbed bits and pieces from a variety of sources. For example, while re-researching stuff for this video, I realised I'd used something that Dragna Carter of Curse of Strahd Reloaded fame also suggested. I don't know if I did the thing independently of him and never saw that, or if I saw that and thought, hey, that's a cool idea. But there's a possibility I might say something and you think, hey, that's actually from XYZ. If that's the case, please let me know and I'll put some credits in the description or in a pinned comment. I think YouTube doesn't like it if people share links in comments unless it's like another YouTube video. So feel free to just tell me what it's called, say what the name of the Reddit post is, then I can reply with the link. That could be a good way to do it. This video also acts as a bit of a double whammy because in addition to talking about my thoughts and the way I kind of played the consorts, I'm going to look at the Real Housewives of Ravenloft, which is where I mostly borrowed from, and talk about that as well. Just a quick note, say no paid promo. I got this years ago. The author didn't ask me to do a video on it. I just decided to do that myself. So first I'm going to talk about the info that's available for the consorts rules as written in the Curse of Strahd book, which is very brief. Then I'll talk through Real Housewives of Ravenloft. Then I'll talk through each consort and talk about what happened to them in my own game, including my sequel campaign that I ran after Curse of Strahd and Barovia. There's timestamps in the description, so if you only want to see the information about Real Housewives of Ravenloft, or if you only want to see the information about a particular consort, you can. So the rules as written info is really not that much. The 3 brides are talked about in K86, that's Strahd's tomb, in the Castle Ravenloft chapter, and Escher is talked about in K49, the lounge, also the Castle Ravenloft chapter. All we have for them is art, what treasure they have on them, and some of Escher's feelings, probably for roleplay purposes. And they're all vampire spawn, just plain, regular vampire spawn like the ones in the coffin shop. So people tend to give them more personality, more roles, unique abilities, and so on. And what I did is I used Real Housewives of Ravenloft as a starting point, then added to them from there. And that feels like a good segue to talk about Real Housewives of Ravenloft. It's a small adventure you can insert into a Curse of Strahd campaign where Strahd invites the PCs to the castle. Could be a good way to get them there for the dinner, and essentially gives them a quest. I think one of my 4 consorts is betraying me. I'd like you to find out who they are and what they're doing and why. And the author's put a lot of thought into the fact that they're vampire spawn, because vampire spawn are under Strahd's control. Maybe Strahd even knows who the traitor is, and this is just a test for the PCs, because he's weighing them up and seeing what they're like. Will they figure it out? Will they screw it up? Will it help him for choosing a successor? But which, as it talks about in the book, it talks about how he eventually comes to the conclusion that no one's good enough to be a successor. And it also talks about how they're all inadvertently betraying him. In their minds, they're helping him by doing what they're doing. They think that they don't realize they're doing anything wrong with their intentions. So that's a good way to go around the whole Strahd has full control over them thing as well. As mentioned earlier, it's a good way to get the players to the castle before the end game and meet and liaise with Strahd and the consorts before the end game. They're invited for dinner, and the resource offers an invitation with revised wording. They arrive, they have dinner, there's revised room descriptions from what's in the Curse of Strahd book. They meet the consorts and it gives conversation points for each of them, things they'd be interested in talking to the PCs about. And then the consorts leave and Strahd gives them a quest. And I think I'm going to quote this directly from the book. I hope the author doesn't mind. And I'll try to do this in my Strahd voice, which I've talked about a few times now. I kind of go for the sort of bored, posh, noble kind of voice. And now, business. You met my consorts. I hope they made a favourable impression on you. I met with Madame Eva a few nights back. The old crone told me one of my beloved consorts betrays me. I know little more, but I want the traitor uncovered and brought to justice. That is where you come in. Find the traitor, why they turned against me, and get them to confess or find irrefutable evidence. leave the sentencing to me. I will deal with the culprit myself, so there should be no need for you to even draw a weapon. In return, I'll be extremely well disposed towards you. Name your reward. Is this something you can do for me? They can refuse, and then that's essentially the end of that adventure, and Rahadin leads them off the premises. Otherwise, Strahd offers them a reward, and it offers a few examples, including, this is really interesting, being able to leave Barovia, but it's only for one PC. If they agree to it, Rahadin can then usher them to different people in different places throughout the castle. But before the fun begins, the DM needs to roll for or decide 3 things. Number 1, which consort is the culprit? Number 2, who is their accomplice, and there's up to 10 choices. And number 3, where they liaise with the accomplice, and there's 4 possibilities. I pre-rolled before recording this, and I got Anastrasya. Her accomplice is Rudolf van Richten, and they liaise on the tower roof, that's K57, via magical messaging. Which works well, because it says about Anastrasya likes to talk to spirits, and maybe she thinks she's talking to a spirit through this magical messaging, but it's Van Richten being clever, or in disguise, or whatever. And the accomplice list is cool. It's all random people throughout Barovia, such as the Abbot, Lady Vokta, Babalasaga, and Van Richten and the Vistani, to name a few. Babalasaga is especially cool because if she's the accomplice and the spawn gets caught, she works some magic on them that causes their head to explode. So that's pretty cool. PCs go around the castle talking to the different consorts, but also they can talk to Cyrus Bellevue, Helga the Maid, and Gertruda. And some parts of the castle are off limits. It explains where and how, places like the Heart of Sorrow and the crypts, and it talks about how to handle random encounters as well. A small criticism for this book, and I try and be fair when I do reviews and not just talk in praise of stuff and talk about the negatives as well as the positives, so apologies to the author if he's watching this. Beyond minor typos, which are pretty forgivable, is that it doesn't seem to give a clear way for the PCs to find out who the traitor is unless I missed it. It seems as though, I should be clearer, it does say that the way to kind of catch them in the act is to see them talking to the accomplice, but it doesn't bridge sort of talking to all the people to going there. So I suppose what would have to happen is they just have to, as they're exploring, just stumble across it by accident. In my case, the location, the tower roof, is quite close to where Escher is. So perhaps as they're going around and they're talking to people, hopefully they've talked to Anastrasya already, they go to talk to Escher, and then I say as they walk near the stairway, they hear a voice on the roof. And maybe that's how and where they have that sort of final encounter and find out that Anastrasya is the traitor. But if they see Escher first, could be too early to do it. It's a tricky one. So I don't, unless I missed it, and apologies to the author if I have, I don't think there's a clear way to say that after they've spoken to certain NPCs, this thing happens, or the way to get them to that, one of those 4 places where the traitor talks to the accomplice is by doing X, Y, Z. Later, if and when the traitor is confronted, there's a fight with them, and there's 4 stat blocks provided for all 4 of them, using Vampire Spawn as a base, and then they're given additional abilities and spells. Strahd swoops in, takes care of the rest, unless Baba's the accomplice, as I mentioned earlier, which means they die. He instead locks them up in one of the empty crypts, and the PCs may be able to free them later on during the endgame, or a later visit to the castle. It's cool. I like it a lot. I can see myself running it for when I run Curse of Strahd again in the future. I'll include a link to it as well as the author's other work in the description of this video. Okay, let's talk about my take on the consorts. We'll start with Anastrasya. I play her as, so each of them almost have like a role, and the other 3 are clearer, but this one I kind of treat her as the warrior, the fighter type. This might be different to what Real Housewives of Ravenloft and Dragna Carter portray her as, just as an FYI. I spoke in a over-the-top noble voice, but with lots of grandeur, like she called the PCs darlings, my darlings. But also to contrast that with her, I had her be talking about the sort of the joy and the honor and the valor of battle. So she'd be like, darlings, I'm afraid it's time that I must defeat you in battle. May you fight well, may it be glorious. I gave her a dancing longsword as a magic item, which one of my PCs then took and still is attuned to and uses this day, which is pretty cool. I thought I came up with this idea myself, but I'll give credit to Dragna Carter here, because in the first iteration of Curse of Strahd Reloaded, I was flicking through to just check how people were talked about, just in case there was any overlap, and it turns out there was overlap. He recommended a dancing sword for Anastrasya as well, so it's very possible I got the idea from him and then thought I came up with it myself, so apologies if that's the case. Or it could just be one heck of a coincidence. It probably isn't. And I had Anastrasya fight them on the way back from the Mad Mage with minions, including a Wraith, which is what's mentioned in Real Housewives of Ravenloft, Wights, skeletons, and zombies, and all that kind of thing. And I remember her final line, just as she was defeated, she said, "An honourable death," and then she died. Stat block for her, I went with Vampire Spawn, but I gave her fighter abilities such as Second Wind and Action Surge. Ludmilla, she's the wizard type. I played her as being very quiet, a woman of few words, and in my game she orchestrated the Feast of St. Andros, which didn't happen because my players got the bones from the coffin shop, which is actually what triggered the invite for the dinner as well. The players were told all this at the dinner when they met Strahd and co, and I said Ludmilla was just glaring at them from afar, and the players were like, "Eek, she doesn't like us." Stat block for her, Vampire Spawn with wizard spells, and I used the list from Real Housewives of Ravenloft, which includes things like Shield, Hold Person, Misty Step, and Counterspell, I believe. Dragon Curse of Strahd Reloaded also gave her a list of spells. Definitely in the first version. I would have thought so in the second version as well, but I haven't checked. Volenta, she's the rogue type because of course she is. I played her as being really curious about weird things. A great example is one of my players played a Warforged, so she went up to them during the dinner. They actually met in the audience hall. So they had the dinner with Strahd, then went up to the audience hall where they met the consorts. And she was like, "How do you breathe? Can you breathe? Can you eat and drink? Do you need to pee and poop? Can you make babies? Do you have veins? What's in them?" And just basically asking him loads of like these questions, and my players like, what's she doing? It was lots of fun. It made the players a bit weirded out, which is exactly what you want from Volenta, I think. Stat block for her, Vampire Spawn with rogue and assassin type abilities such as sneak attack, evasion, and assassinate. Sneak attack is, well, I've got a rogue PC and I've played a rogue in the past. I can know how deadly sneak attack can be. And when they fought her in the final battle, she managed to get sneak attack off a few times, which obviously boosted the damage she did by quite a number. And Escher. Escher is the subject of one of my favourite Curse of Strahd memes, which is a meme from Arrested Development, which is one of my favourite comedy shows, so works really well. He's the bard type. I played him as the newest consort who was part of an adventuring group from Waterdeep, but they all died trying to fight Strahd, and he got turned into a spawn. I have a feeling that I've got this from somewhere and didn't make this up myself, so I got a feeling that quite a few people play him this way, and there's probably some old Reddit posts out there talking about how he's a bard from Waterdeep and part of their adventuring party. And because he mentioned he was from Waterdeep and my players were all from Faerun, they were like, "Hey, we know Waterdeep." And so he was like, "Tell me about my home. How have things been going in the last 100 plus years?" The bard PC asked to have a bard off with him. And so I got them to roll performance checks, and Escher rolled terribly and the bard rolled really well. So the bard won, which made Escher really sulky, which, classic Escher. The stat block for him, Vampire Spawn, and not only did I give him bardic inspiration, but I gave him bard spells. I used the examples from Real Housewives of Ravenloft, including Charm Person, Healing Word, Thunderwave, and Calm Emotions. I've got a little miscellaneous section as well, which I've just helpfully called Other Points and Considerations. So these are kinds of other things to think about with the consorts that I can think to fit in elsewhere. Real Housewives of Ravenloft has legendary actions for each of them, which look good and are cool. But in my opinion, I'd say don't use them if you include them in the battle with Strahd as extra minions, because then you've got multiple enemies with legendary actions. Probably be too many and get too messy. So you probably just want Strahd to have legendary actions and no one else. But if they're standalone bosses, like when I ran Anastrasya on the way back from the Mad Mage, go to town. Use them. Castle territories. So I remember this from the first iteration of Reloaded. I'll include a link to it in the description. It's pages 13 to 15. I'm not sure if it is in the current iteration to try and find it, but couldn't. The idea here is that the spawn, and I think other non-consort Strahd allies, have almost designated areas in the castle they might be found in, and this could be really cool for if they're exploring the castle. Maybe they're trying to find what the final Taroko card is, find that location to fight Strahd, and they go through an area that Volenta or Ludmilla is in charge of looking after. For example, Anastrasya is in charge of the main floor and Court of the Count. Volenta is in charge of the Heart of Sorrow and the elevator trap, stuff like that. I've seen some people make them full-blooded, no pun intended, vampires rather than just vampire spawn. You might want to consider that. I personally wouldn't do that for a few reasons. Firstly, it would mean that Strahd would have to relinquish control. And Strahd, I think, wouldn't probably want to have a vampire who's an equal to him, who isn't under his control, wandering around Barovia. Plus, I also think Strahd should be the strongest person, and there shouldn't be vampires with other abilities, like Volenta's rogue type abilities, Escher's bard spells, who might be able to rival him or be as strong as him. I think Strahd should be the strongest. He should be the only vampire, and the others should be vampire spawn. And what happens to vampire spawn when their master dies and they survive? I looked into it for when this happened in my game. I believe they remain as vampire spawn, but they now have full free will. So they don't automatically become vampires and have the higher challenge rating, higher HP, stat block. They remain as spawn, but have full free will. And now talking about what happened to the consorts in my game. So they were first met during the dinner with Strahd, which I did the dinner like many Curse of Strahd DMs do. It's kind of a popular homebrew thing where it's kind of like a diplomatic meeting. It's a meet and greet, get to know the Lord of the Land, maybe give them some quests, not as the trap that it's posed as in the book where they arrive. There's they said illustration of Strahd, the illusion of Strahd, and the drawbridge goes up and they're trapped. And then I plan to have them as mini bosses in different places. Anastrasya after the Mad Mage visit, Ludmilla at Volenta Pass. I got a feeling I got that from Lunch Break Heroes in their Volenta Pass video. Volenta, I can't remember where I put it, but I do remember that I changed the special delivery special event in Argynvostholt. This is where a Vistana drops off a coffin full of bats, and instead of having it be one of the Vistani, I had it be Volenta, kind of just giggling away at herself as she rode off. And in the end, before the final battle, they only fought Anastrasya, so 3 were still left in play. The reason for this is we had to wrap up the campaign a bit quicker than expected. Originally, we were going to be completionists and do everything, then save Castle Ravenloft for the last. But we couldn't do things like Brez and the Amber Temple until after, as part of the sort of sequel campaign. So I moved Ludmilla and Volenta back to the castle and had them as minions. Had them in their different territories, as per what I talked about earlier, the castle territories from Reloaded version 1. And later they joined the final battle partway through. As I mentioned, Volenta got off a few hits with sneak attack that did a bit of damage. I remember Ludmilla walked in invisible, because I think she has invisibility rather than greater invisibility, and then just started attacking when people weren't expecting it. But not Escher, because he's just sulking and forgotten. And I think it's hilarious that he's kind of viewed as the sort of the forgotten consort, the one that Strahd cares the least about. So he didn't join the final battle. He wasn't asked, so he sat it out and just sat in the lounge the whole time. So Ludmilla and Volenta were killed alongside Strahd in the final battle, and Escher escaped, and I followed the information in Curse of Strahd epilogue that says if Escher survives, he goes off and does his own thing and tries to be a vampire lord somewhere. And months later out of game, I put him in the Sea of Sorrows, and I had him as a bit of a mini-boss. He got hold of one of the instruments of the bards, which meant he had even more spells he could cast, and it was a lot of fun. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here. If you want to learn more about that, you can watch my Sea of Sorrows video from a year or two ago. Although one thing I will say is it was left ambiguous whether he was killed or not because he died off screen. So I could potentially have him return at some point as well, which could be great. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. I hope it was useful. I think the next Curse of Strahd video, another one I've been putting off a million years, is Babylon Saga. Reason I've been putting it off is because I just want to make sure I do it justice. I think it's going to take a lot of prep, a lot of notes. I got a good idea of what I want to say and how I want to go about it. So hopefully, if it's not the next Curse of Strahd video and I bottle it and decide to do a different Curse of Strahd video in the meantime, then hopefully that'll follow on soon after. And then Ravenloft, I'm still doing videos around Ravenloft The Horrors Within and Shadowlands videos because my players are in the Shadowlands at the moment. And we'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.